This episode is brought to you by mine. Stick around to the end to discover which companies have your personal data and how you can reclaim it. The king's sharp sword lies clean and bright, prepared in foreign lands to fight. Our ravens croak to have their fill. The wolf howls from the distant hill. The forest-dwelling peasantry glimpsed that feared man. Here was the exiled King Olaf, returned from the land of the Rus to take back the throne of Norway. At his side was his half-brother, the strong Harald Sigurdsson, 15 years of age. On the path, vagabonds joined their army, and this force settled on a small hill at a place called Stiklestad. And at once they perceived the clamor of another army, led by a man who once served Olaf, Kulf Arnason. He now marched on behalf of the usurper king Canute the Great, who ruled over Denmark, England, and this kingdom of Norway. Men howled summons to Christ, others to Odin, and the two armies fell upon each other in fury. Olaf's position was overrun. Stray limbs and corpses trailed slick upon the hill. An enemy stabbed young Harald, and King Olaf was impaled. And so recorded the Norse lore. King Olaf fell upon a stone, and he called out to God as he clutched at the spear which quivered in his abdomen. And he looked up to see Kulf Arnason, who duly cut Olaf's throat. Soldiers scattered. Kulf and his men stalked the body hills, killing the wounded. The bleeding Harald gathered to his feet and stole into the wilderness, staggering through the thick until he came to a hovel. Therein a kindly peasant family received him and tended to his wounds by firelight. Harald healed there for some days, but he could not tarry, for the black winter would soon turn the woods bitter and block the high passes east. So Harald wrapped himself in a red cloak, and the peasant's son showed him the way into the mountains. Straying from the main roads, the intrepid prince wandered over quiet peaks, and avoiding bandit hideouts, he passed into old and heathen woods, where legend said lived giants and trolls. Harald came finally to Sweden, and finding other survivors from Stiklestad, he wintered there, rallied some strong allies, and departed Scandinavia. Harald and his warriors passed in dragon ships before quiet wooden towns and humble cathedrals. Their forebears had once come to this land of the Rus to slaughter and plunder, for the age of the Viking had begun 2 centuries before. Norse chiefs had gathered the bravest sons of Odin to burn, loot, and enslave all the coasts of Europe. But here the Norse had also settled, and along with local Slavs and Finnic peoples, they established a vast state called the Kievan Rus. In Scandinavia, too, the days of the old gods and petty clans were waning. Men like Olaf and Canute had made Christian kings of themselves and brought war against those fractious heathen chieftains. And yet Odin's raven flew still on the royal banners, and the cruel axes of Norsemen were feared in every realm. Thus, Harald and his men endeavored here to become mercenaries. Passing through the lofty gates of Novgorod or Kiev, Harald came to the court of the Grand Prince Yaroslav the Wise, to whom he relayed sorrowful word of Olaf's demise. For it was Yaroslav who had provided sanctuary for Olaf in his exile, and still present in this court were Olaf's mistress and his illegitimate son, Magnus. Yaroslav welcomed Harald and sent the prince and his warriors first into the boglands of Poland, where they slew enemy Poles and destroyed their dwellings. In this manner, Harald sharpened his axe against the prince's enemies for years, earning glory and blood money as he went. He finally proposed that Yaroslav betroth him to his child daughter, the Kievan princess Elizaveta, but Yaroslav refused. For Harald, at roughly 18 years of age, remained a brave but crownless leader among the king's officers, and he possessed neither land nor riches. In 1034, 2 Norwegians arrived in Kievan Rus, bitter enemies of the late Olaf, the corpulent Einar Thumbar-Skelfir, and Kolf Arneson. King Canute was being overthrown in Norway, and they had come to collect a suitable successor. Not Harald, so strong of will, but the impressionable child Magnus. Harald did not possess the men nor the riches to challenge all these enemies, to take the throne he so desired. Yet he had heard of distant lands filled with fabled treasures to be won in glorious battles. And so Harald gathered a few hundred men and sailed far south. The sun shone white against heavenward crosses and fell smoothly down the domes and aqueducts, scattering into shadows against houses and canopied streets. When Rome fell to the barbarians in the times of old and the western glory waned, it was this city that kept alight the flame of that ancient empire. This was Constantinople, the heart of the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire. Harald pushed through the city. Magnificent forums clattered with the wares of merchants from afar, and there were foul streets lined by groaning beggars and brothels. Harald approached the palace and enlisted in the Varangian Guard, the ranks of storied Norse mercenaries prized by these Byzantines as loyal bodyguards and elite infantry. It was Varangians who guarded the throne, where sat Emperor Michael IV, and by his side the fair Empress Zoe, more than 30 years his senior. Only months before, Michael had been merely the low-born lover of the Empress. It was widely believed that the pair orchestrated the murder of her husband, Emperor Romanus III. They married the very day he died. Harald and his men were welcomed here, for a grave threat afflicted this empire. The Islamic Fatimid Caliphate ruled the Holy Land and much of the southern Mediterranean, and of late thousands of Muslim corsairs from Islamic Sicily and Tunisia began to assail the shores of Christendom, raiding villages, killing the men, and stealing women and children into slavery. To those burning coasts the emperor now sent his fleet. Byzantine ships careened after the pirates and unleashed howling streams of Greek fire. Some of the pirates perished in the infernal winds. Others would have raised their scimitar in defense, only to be met by the rageful Harald and his Vikings grappling aboard with two-handed axes. They annihilated the pirates on the ships they captured, and joined the Byzantine land campaign to brutally conquer and subjugate Muslim-held towns along the imperial borders. The Fatimids responded with equal force, massacring and enslaving Christian towns, and then they brokered peace with Michael IV. Their terms permitted Christians to rebuild the sacred Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, destroyed by the Fatimids a few decades before when their caliph had, for a time, forced Christians to convert to Islam. It was written that Harald joined the imperial delegation on a long and arid journey across the desert, until at last they beheld the Holy Land. The Byzantines toured the hallowed shrines of Jerusalem, walked the pilgrim-trodden path of the crucifixion. Harald made use of his axe, butchering bandits who stalked their caravan, and later stopped to bathe in the River Jordan. Now in his 20s, Harald came to command the Varangians with stern ferocity. He joined the Byzantine invasion of Islamic Sicily and was said to have ended a siege by tunneling under the walls of a city with his Varangians and slaying the garrison. In all his conquests, he plundered greedily and amassed a hoard of foreign treasure. But all was not well in this empire. Prayers rang out in the gilded churches of Constantinople. Dark days lay ahead. could see, the Emperor was ailing. His flesh swelled, and he was beset by violent seizures. He adopted his nephew Michael as his son and named him as his successor. Some were wary of the younger Michael. One monk recalled, "He concealed a wicked nature under a benign front. He was adept at scheming and plotting." Yet the Emperor still lived, and he summoned Harald to claim some final glory at his side and crush a revolt among the Bulgars. And so together they laid waste to the rebel towns, capturing a rebel king who had had his eyes plucked and nose cut off, and they returned to Constantinople in a victorious procession. Harald was hailed as the brave burner of the Bulgars, while the pallid, sickly emperor wavered on his horse. He died soon after. His adopted son was crowned Emperor Michael V, and the Golden Court became a corrupt garden of sycophants, possessed by the paranoia of the emperor. Michael sent men to attack Harald, but he and the Varangians killed the imperial assassins. Neither did Michael V trust Zoe. In truth, he had once thought to make a bride of his adoptive mother, but she was now over 60 and could bear him no heir. He had Zoe arrested, hastily convicted of attempting to poison him, and it was written, he dared to cut the hair off Zoe as though she was a common whore, and to banish her to an island in chains, where she was forced to become a nun. The people were outraged. Mobs formed at the feet of pillared palaces. Michael V brooded in his quarters, tormented by their shouts of derision, their love of Zoe. He arranged for the return of the former empress, and forced the captive Zoe to implore the crowds to accept him as their emperor. The people were not swayed by this gesture. Crowds stormed the palace, and Harald and his men joined the rebellion. They cut down the palace guards, overran the royal quarters, and the mobs looted the gold, fine tapestries, and silk therein. Emperor Michael was found cowering in a monastery, pleading that he had relinquished the throne and taken monastic vows. The people dragged him from the altar to the walls of Constantinople. And there the Norse sagas recorded it was Harald of Norway himself who emerged to sate the mob's cries for blood. He pulled up the writhing and hysterical Michael V, and with his dagger he plucked out his eyes. The emperor wailed and bled at the feet of this Viking, and Michael was then said to have been castrated. Then he was banished to a monastery where he died a few months later. In time, the throne would be restored to Zoe. Some believed the empress longed for Harald, and yet Zoe would marry another lover, a man over 20 years her junior. If Harald had washed his blade in the blood of royals, there were yet other kings to slay. For the throne of Norway was sat upon by the bastard son of his dead brother, and counseled by traitors to his house. Harald would have his vengeance. I may not have a throne to claim, but I do have rights to my personal information online, thanks to privacy regulations like the GDPR and CCPA. With all the data breaches of today, I don't want companies I no longer use holding on to or selling my info. With mine, I've discovered which companies hold my personal data. This isn't a very old email address, and there's still 73 companies here. I haven't used some of these for a long time. Here's Shopify. You can see I rarely use it, and the data breach potential is high, and they have my address and financial information. And this is what I love. I just hit reclaim, and it sends an official data deletion request directly from my email, so they can verify my identity. Mine also offers a solution to help companies with their ultimate goal of simplifying and improving consumers' online privacy experiences. You should get to see and decide where you want to keep your data and where you don't. So take a minute to sign up at SayMine.com today and own your data.